You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. Bringing you news from the local area and around the world. We aim to bring Salford around the world and around the world to Salford. We're very fortunate show to feature some of the world's best athletes, sports people who work in sports across a wide range of disciplines. We've spoken to psychologists, physical trainers, coaches, you name it. They've been kind to give us an insight into their work on the show. We've also have a segment speaking to some of the world's most prominent people in the field of psychology who've been kind enough to share their perception of psychology and related fields. Today we have a really interesting guest. We're going to speak about physical performance. We're sort of going back to speak about physical performance, and it's always a popular show when we speak about physical performance, particularly in football. A lot of our listeners, whether they participate in sport or not, are generally intrigued at how things work in training in football. So our next guest is Head of Physical Performance at Huddersfield Town Football Club, Paul Bauer. Welcome to the show. Great to have on board.
Nice to speak to you.
Yeah, Paul, so let's sort of start from the beginning for our listeners. How did you get into sort of what you do, physical training, physical performance in sport?
Yeah, good question. So I started off going all the way back to when I played sport as a youngster. Basically wasn't quite at the level required in terms of football. It was my sports. And then kind of found myself wanting to move through into learn about, all the kind of the things that go on behind the scenes. So I really enjoyed PE and the theory of PE at school. Then went to college and did sports studies. Then it wasn't quite good enough, so then I go to university. Started to do my BSc in sports science. Spent a year playing cricket in Australia as well. Now the approach to fitness was different, even at amateur level over there.
Yeah,
so it was always ticking in my mind. Did the BSc, did a masters, and then kind of just fell into roles through period of internships and full time, and then found myself in football, working at football, and 10 years down the line here I am.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say. I mean, I think certainly sport in the UK has come a long way. People like yourself who work in physical performance and sort of related fields. And is that the way you sort of see it, Paul, from sort of when you sort of first began? Do you feel it's sort of come a long way since then? Things, obviously we've seen GB do well in the Olympics, and they're always at the top now, and not just in that sport, but in general. Yeah,
I think I've been really fortunate in terms of the timing. I think around 2008, when I graduated from university with my BSc, we were at a period where sports science was generally young, and a lot of people doing it. Generally, it was seen as stuff done in a laboratory.
Yeah.
So athletes would come from their club to a university and they'd be testing on a treadmill and blood would be taken, and it was very laboratory kind of. That was the kind of oversight of it.
Yeah.
Where we've moved through the years now, it's very integrated into the day-to-day run-ins. It's more like a football science. So my role specifically now basically is working with the coaches to integrate the physical side of things and make sure that the whole operation and the logistical side of the whole performance operation is smooth, so that we're able to maximise player performance. I was lucky with the timing, and then the E-Triple-P came along in 2012 and really kind of transformed academy football. So you've got more and more sports scientists, physical performance coaches, whatever name you want to call them, who are working within the game. And I think that's coincided with an improvement and almost bigger attention to detail in terms of the coaching side as well. Coaches are much better now. Young players from that era when I first started, and now I've always had sports scientists, so they see it as kind of normal.
Yeah.
So it's kind of gone full circle where there was just one, and now there's then to a real period of specialists, and now it's quite this generalist approach to it, where it's really integrated into the day-to-day workings. And it will change again, I'm sure it will, but definitely it's advanced across since 2005 when I started my degree anyway.
Yeah, and that's really interesting you say. I find it really fascinating because you sort of, the margins, the high up you go, I guess, are going to be more and more minimal. So you're looking to, not just about having the advantage, but you want to make sure that every sort of thing matters. Everything sort of counts. The higher up you go. But what I find is for yourself, Paul, you also were involved in cricket too. I mean, how different is sort of, I know obviously completely different games, but just for our listeners in terms of, I mean, I've noticed also even in cricket these days, they're athletes as well. It's gone in the days like years gone by. Now they've got these really physical training regimes. But what's your thoughts in terms of working in cricket and football? What are sort of some of the differences based on your experience?
Yeah, well, I can't speak for what it's like in 2021. I worked with Yorkshire Cricket and played back in the kind of the late 2000s, early 2010s really.
Yeah.
And worked at Yorkshire 2011. So I can only speak from my experience then.
Yeah.
I think back then it was new.
Yeah.
There was generally a strength and conditioning. It was based around the gym-based stuff, so it was all about the strength and conditioning and the work in the gym to make sure players were able to deal with the demands of the sport. Now that general rule hasn't changed. That's what we're here for. We're here to prepare the athletes for the demands of the sport.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think in cricket now, just from my observations and people I've spoken to, it now look at the running demands and the actual demands of the sport from an athletic point of view. So the fielding, changing across formats, I think is a thing that comes into play. You have to be conditioned to be able to deal with a 4-day county game or a 5-day test match, and then come into a 2020 series where it's more intense, more explosive. So I think there's a much more scientific approach to player conditioning or athlete conditioning for that. But I think back when I worked there in 2011, it was my first real full-time experience, and it was at the time I was really surprised about the divide. I saw it as the bowlers were really focused on S&C and the impact it could have on their performance because they could see the benefit of it, whereas the batsmen less so because they didn't feel it could help them. However, you look at how hard the balls are being hit and how far they're hitting the balls now, and I think it's swept across the formats of the game and across the different disciplines within it also.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Very, very different, but I'd also say very, very similar in that we're all trying to just prepare players prepare athletes for the demands of the sport in which they're taking part in.
Yeah, no, I find it really interesting because, I mean, from an outside point of view, I look at sort of cricket and see, some players that are fast bowlers that are kind of, I suppose defying physiology is probably not the right word, but you think, well, they're going on till their mid to late 30s and still playing at the highest level. And you think, well, I wonder how much sports science has had an effect. I mean, obviously, you've got, there's many variables, I suppose genes, you're lucky not to get injured and so on and so forth, but it must have an impact, I think, on players who are playing.
100%. But it'd be very difficult for me to comment on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Understand his program.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
39 years of age and he's an absolute freak of nature. But I'm sure he's got a really regimented strength and conditioning program, and ultimately he takes care of himself. Better than most, and it always comes back down to the athlete and what they're prepared and willing to do away from the training ground or away from the field as it is.
Absolutely. Doesn't imagine
it always comes back down to that.
The demands of biomechanically of being a fast bowler. You think, wow, for sort of, the sort of stress they put the body under. You think, it's incredible, really. And I mean, even football. Now I was watching football on TV on Sunday, and Ibrahimovic is like 40 years of age, and he was on fire. I'm thinking, goodness me, it's like, how do they do that type thing? You kind of keep. I mean, it must be obviously the genetic element, but I'm sure, like he says, it's that sort of people like yourself involved in the game in general, who sort of obviously enhance. But is that one area as well for you, for all the sort of injury prevention that you sort of focus on too, or?
No, not necessarily. I think injury prevention or reduction of injury is a byproduct of increased performance.
Yes.
So we're always looking at Huddersfield Town and how we can improve the performance of the players. Yeah. Whether that's through better communication between staff, through a more data-informed approach to training load, whether it's through increased better nutrition on match days. It's always about how can we maximise performance, because as a result of all these cogs moving at the right speed and in the right direction, injuries will reduce as a result of that. So rather than trying to be over cautious and go, we're going to protect what we actually try and do is we try and push all the boundaries a little bit, and then that actually provides the protection needed.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's a really sort of interesting point you've made there. I'm sure people listening to that. I think that I mean, I suppose in saying that it sort of requires a lot of work to do so. And in terms of yourself, well, what are some of the? I mean, just in general in your own sort of career, what are sort of some of the challenges that sort of I suppose someone in your sort of role has? And I can imagine obviously there are sort of demands of making sure that sort of things are running smooth and getting the best out of the players. But just an insight for our sort of listeners who might even be considering to go into that role on some level. What are some of the challenges that they might face?
Oh yeah, always challenge. Players are a challenge. Naturally, you're working with. Take our first team squad. I think we've currently got 24 first team players, all from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different nationalities, different backgrounds. So naturally, players are a challenge in a good way because they're always wanting more. They always want to win, want to improve. So they're a challenge. I think coaches are a natural challenge, and it's a positive relationship in the sense of coaches are always pushing for certain things. They naturally want the players on the grass more. They naturally want to train hard. They naturally want to football matches, but there has to be a compromise along the way. So definitely a challenge in terms of coaches. But I think the main thing is, the main battle I've had throughout my career is trying to get people to understand what my actual role is. So I think the perception of a sports scientist, physical performance coach is someone who does the warm-up on match day and fills up the water bottles.
Yeah.
And that is part of the role. Don't get me wrong, that is part of the role. There's so much that goes on behind this that I probably couldn't tap into in this interview. But, we deal with logistics, the operations, timings, training schedules, what's going on, and all the strength and conditioning that works around it, and nutrition plan. It's strategizing a lot of things. It's a all-encompassing role. And a lot of people go into sports science, I think, and they feel that it is just the warm-ups and the waters, and it's the match days, and it's in accelerating last-minute winners in front of crowds, and that's actually the easy bit. That's the bit where you're not actually doing anything. The hard bit and the challenges come throughout the week, days and nights in hotels. I'm in a hotel today waiting for our picture tonight, and time away from home. They're real challenges that actually I'm getting used to now.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it is a challenging role, but it's really, really rewarding at the same time because you get to see the players improve, and ultimately go up and win football matches and get better. You hopefully see coaches improve their coaching practice, put on better sessions, more efficient sessions for the players. And I think it's rough with it. It's like any job role. There's challenges and there's rewards to both.
It's interesting you say. And in terms of say the training, Paul, is it sort of compartmentalize the training in terms of working with like yourself or with the team around you, or is it integrated a bit of both in terms of, because I can imagine obviously that the coaches are going to be working with tactically, you'll have a technical session or skills session and then obviously physical. I mean, how do you sort of integrate all that together? That must take a lot of planning.
So the key is to not have that reductionist approach and actually just try and train everything all the time.
Yes.
That's the key. So I try and talk my kind of philosophy. It's nothing new, but basically we work back from what the championship season is, so we know that's 46 competitive fixtures and around about between 2 and 4 cup games, so 50 games within a year across a 46-week period where we've got between 8 and 12 double game weeks. Those games, take from midfielder, for example, we'll cover 12 kilometres in distance, of which will be between 1,000 and metres high speed running. And then working from the game to the training week, we know that within a training week they might do between 1 and 2 times same distance and high intensity running. That's in a game. So it's understanding that's the map of what's going on. Now where are the pockets, the right time and the right place to do certain things. There's a right time to lift heavy weights. There's also a wrong time. There's a right time to do recovery. There's a right time to have days off. there's a right time to work extensively, there's a wrong time to work extensively. Also, flip side of that, people disagree to can work those ways whenever you want, as long as there's a consistent pattern to how you're working. So for me, it's how over that big right here, it's like plan. So we break those 6-week chunks down into weeks, to break each week down into a day, and what does each day individually look like, and then how does that day then break down into the physical preparation, on-pitch performance, what does our warm-up look like, and how is it integrated what they're about to do.
Yeah,
so it's all streamlined. So
yeah.
That's effectively my job, is to try and make sure that every time we have a contact with the player, one, it primes the learning for the training or the game we're about to do, but two, also improve them. So every time we work with the players, we can improve them, irrespective of age.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's obviously a really really professional, attention to detail approach. I'm sure that the listeners will be fascinated, by that, listening in and sort of, realising just how much goes into preparing players for match day. I suppose there's a lot of variables that can affect a result, and certainly, the physical side is a huge one. I mean, just out of interest, Paul, do you sort of do like fitness testing and that sort of? Do you like implement fitness testing as well, or?
Yeah. So we test on the first day of pre-season.
Yeah.
And then we test at regular periods throughout the year. So we integrate our testing into our physical preparation work, so it's no different. So we do jump testing on force platforms, and we use the Nord board for hamstring strength. And we would test them just periodically as part of their training. So the players wouldn't even know, but we're getting continuous data feedback on discrepancies, muscle decay, strength decays, power increases, all the things we kind of need. And then we just, as a result, we create individualised programs based on what we're seeing. But we don't have specific, it's testing day to day, and everyone rocks up at and does all different battery of tests. It's more integrated in. One thing we do is we do a lot of skin fold and DEXA scans in terms of body composition.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So we do that, I'd say, definitely one in pre-season, and we've just had one recently in the October break, and there'll probably be another one around March.
Yeah.
So I'd say we do them three times a year, and then basically each player gets an individual nutrition plan based. That's going to help them perform to their, but B, also be at the right body composition to be able to deal with the demands of the championship, which we spoke about earlier.
That's really interesting. That I find that quite interesting. That approach, sort of, to be fair. But and yourself, Paul, are you sort of involved also with the youth players, the academy players, or is it mainly first team? Now my role effectively oversee the whole provision across the club. Wow, yeah.
In terms of physical performance.
Yeah.
But my role up until this year was head academy physical performance, effectively.
Yeah.
So I worked throughout all the kind of strategy that the academy's got there, and then naturally fell into this role when predecessor left to go to his new role. I was fortunate enough for the club to into this role, and it's my first time working in the first team environment, so I'm still learning on the job. Nowhere near the finished product, but what academy football gave me and has given me is a brilliant grounding in terms of coaching, physical performance, working with players, building relationships, practice things, doing things wrong. Academy football, that is what it is for. That's ultimately what applies in an academy. Players need to learn the ropes. That's exactly why staff members are also in there. So without that grounding, I'm not saying I'm successful now, but without that grounding, there's no way I'd be able to do the job. No way. So currently at the club, I oversee everything, but we have people in situ who look after the academy, and I just link in with those people and make sure I'm doing everything the same. So it's aligned. It might not be the same in terms of content and detail, because they're working with mature and athletes, but the philosophy remains the same, and you'll be able to see that the academy are doing similar things based on their population.
So yes, a similar sort of. I suppose with the academy, I mean, do you tend to sort of? Does the training lean more towards developing the player?
I think it does start with football. I think it's one thing that Huddersfield Town is really, really good at. Is you can always develop the players. I just think that the priority is different within academy football.
Absolutely, yeah.
You approach a football game, you approach a match, and it's not the end of the world if you lose. It's not the end of the world, and they might approach games, or we used to approach playing out of position, players having had a hard training week, so they're playing under fatigue. That fans don't need to know about. The players, when they execute skills and they see how they feel, and you review it, and something different the week after, or you follow a certain. And whereas at first team, it's no, we need to maximise performance for every single match day. So if there's no, we'll try this week, it's like, no.
It's about winning is the priority. Exactly, yeah.
Of course it is. And I think one thing I'm trying to do is I almost look at the next game. So today we played this evening. You know, and we got Cardiff away on Friday, so my attention's already turning to Friday. And what we can do from the final whistle, so effectively Saturday at 3 o'clock, to make sure that the players are able to recover from the game, whether win, lose or draw, and be in the best condition to go win on Saturday. And that starts now, really. So there's still a development kind of. I think that's where the academy's helped me. Is I'm always thinking about the next game. It's a process. Win, lose or draw. If we do the right things on Saturday, we're giving ourselves the best opportunity to win, lose or draw again.
Absolutely, that's interesting. Well, for sure, I think that that's quite interesting. You mentioned that's a really fascinating insight in terms of how the first team works, and also the transition from youth to first team as well. In terms of yourself, I mean, obviously, love your job and find it really rewarding. And what are some of the highlights for you so far in terms of your own sort of career? Do you have any sort of highlights that come to mind, or you just...
Hello?
Hi, Paul. Sorry, it just cut off.
Sorry, mate, you just cut out.
Yeah, no problem. No, just saying any sort of highlights that you can think of in your own sort of career thus far.
Yeah, so young players breaking through and establishing themselves in the first team, always a highlight. Just because you've kind of lived their journey with them, and you put, you the parents of that player, to see them then go on and play first team football is really, really rewarding. I think personally, one of the things that I'm really, really proud of is I was able to apply for the FA. Which was looking at the 2000s age group, which had, players like Joe, Phil, Foden, and players like that. And we won a couple of tournaments out there. Now, obviously, the players was going to win. But I think that was really rewarding for me to be involved in it. So,
absolutely. I mean, amazing generation of sort of players.
Yeah, play against teams like Brazil, Holland, and be almost pitting your wits against, the equivalent best of their native players and staff. Really rewarding and something I really, really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Nothing. We've not had any options or anything like that, so there's nothing really that stands out. I think the main thing is young players and players who've broken through into first teams and in the Football League, some in the Premier League.
Yeah, and so I can imagine it's
really rewarding.
Buzz for sure, and absolutely, I suppose it's something that sort of stays with you, and no doubt there'll be many, many more years to come for you too, Paul. Just out of interest in terms of, any sort of, anyone listening in, young person maybe at university sort of contemplating going into sports science in sport or in football, what are and it's hard to give advice, obviously everyone's different, but what would you say, Paul, to anyone sort of considering it? I mean, obviously having spoken to you, and it is a lot of hard, it is, you have to put the work in, and there's a lot of work around it, but is there anything that you could sort of share with anyone sort of listening in, sort of considering going down that path?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think if you go in with low expectations and glamour, you'll probably thrive a lot more. It's long hours, it's brilliant pay, it's difficult, it's tough, it's challenging. But I think the main where I've improved the most is if you self-reflect all the time and you try and work out why things are happening, why you behave in a certain way under certain circumstances, why players behave. I I think that gives you a nice kind of big picture view of things, and I think you can control situations a lot. Ultimately, it's professional sports, so it's very emotional at times. I think those who can detach themselves from the emotion and are able to just control the way in which they act under those circumstances probably prosper more, because they don't say things that they shouldn't have said, or they don't put themselves in situations where they cause themselves problems. I think I've been fortunate enough to have help from psychologists at clubs who'd help
absolutely
myself, and to help me detach from what's going on and try and understand why. So, a player gets substituted, they're going to be annoyed. Is it the time to approach, say something about the next game? Probably not. Just leave that and we'll speak about another time. And it sounds really simple. Maybe it's just me, maybe I found it.
No, absolutely. It's
think like that. Think like that. So I think that's the big thing for me, is be really reflective, self-critical, and look to try and improve all the time, but understand that it's not glamorous, and it is a hard grind, but it's so rewarding if you put the hours in, and you're fortunate enough to be supported by people around you. I think it's a great career.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's really interesting you say that. I'm sure people sort of listening in, sort of contemplating going down that sort of career path, see the glory and sort of, teams winning and sort of being a part of it. But there's a lot of work involved, like you said, in producing players too. I mean, I can imagine that's got its own sort of challenges where it's not easy to become a professional.
For the 24 teams in the champion, 21 teams who are ultimately disappointed, 3 who are very disappointed because they've been relegated.
Absolutely.
So that you're not in control of whether that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I suppose on top of that,
it's real.
Yeah, there's so many sort of variables that go with it, for sure. Absolutely. Well, that's really interesting. I mean, I sort of found really interesting speaking to you, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. We have a wide range of people who listen in, who some play at high level, some just generally just have an interest in what goes on in the world of sports. So it's been interesting speaking to you, Paul. So we wish you all the best, Paul. I really want to thank you for coming on board. It's been kind of you to join us, and we wish Huddersfield the best this year. And thanks again, Paul. Great stuff.
Great.
That was Paul Bauer, from the head of physical performance at Huddersfield Town Football Club, who was kind enough to join us on the Friday Sports Show, 94.4 FM, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi.